What is going on, YouTube people? Northeast Ohio Cards and Comics here today to talk about some grading data. Our boy Gemrate, as always, just absolutely crushing it on his updates. And he is now, as we've talked in previous videos, fully incorporated BGS and SGC data. So we're going to dive in and take a peek at the January grading data across the three various companies. And there's some interesting things. I don't think it's surprising. I think these numbers kind of back up what we already thought was going on. And it'll be curious to track these numbers going forward as we move throughout the year and grading prices fluctuate and whatnot. So right off the get, January totals. You can see the Gemrate percentages over here on the left-hand side. We're not really going to focus on that. What I want to talk about is percentages of item graded for each grader. And you can see they have it broken down by decades. So we're going to just call this ultra modern, just to keep things simple. 2020s and newer. Modern 2010s. SGC dominating ultra modern with 41% of their items graded in January coming from that category. I am not surprised by this, as for the entire month of January, they were essentially the cheapest and easiest to grade with of the big three. And in my opinion, these are really the only three that make sense right now in the current marketplace. PSA, BGS, SGC. I really don't see a need to use anyone else unless you're grading bottom of the barrel stuff and you want to send it to CSG for $8 a card. That's your play. You do you. It's not for me. But pretty much any card fits the mold of one of these three companies, depending on what it is that you're grading. So SGC having their biggest month, or I shouldn't say their biggest month, the fact that January is dominated by Ultra Modern for SGC is not surprising, just due to the fact that at $30 a card, they are the easiest ones to get this new product ripped and sent to grade and turn around. On the flip side, BGS's only being 18% is also not surprising because BGS has such a high cost to grade. They are just now beginning to open up some cheaper service levels through group submitters at $60 a card. But the problem is, you're paying an arm and a leg for BGS grading, and in most cases, at least like ultra modern flip stuff, and once again, I'm not talking about like super high end RPAs, etc., stuff that maybe makes sense in a BGS slab. But like a random silver prism really makes absolutely no sense to send to Beckett. You're paying the most out of all three companies to grade with it, and it sells for potentially the least. An SGC 10 will sell at or around, or if not better than a BGS 9.5, and a PSA 10 will outsell all three of them. So it just doesn't really make sense to send a lot of ultra modern stuff BGS's way. PSA with around 28% in that category, not surprising. They're not completely dominating, or that decade, I guess, that category, it's not a full decade, it's just a couple years. That ultra modern category not dominating their numbers is not surprising due to the higher cost to grade. Less brand new cards coming out of packs, boxes, etc. make sense to send their way. And when we look at some other stuff, PSA is really dominating the TCG category, and I have to imagine a lot of that is older stuff as well. So that's probably skewing it back to the 2010s and 2000s a little bit, mostly 2010s. But we'll talk about that on a different slide here in a second. So to me, these numbers tell the story of kind of what we already know. It's just nice to have the numbers to back them up. SGC makes the most sense for ultra modern quick flip stuff, mid to lower end, send it down there, get it back, sell it, move on to the next thing. BGS makes really no sense to use for ultra modern stuff, and PSA makes some sense to use for ultra modern stuff depending on the card. And those numbers 100% back up kind of what we talk about here all the time. So it is nice to actually see that laid out and to have the actual numbers back up the thought process that I think a lot of us have had for this entire time. And then you get into the 2010s, you know, PSA and BGS dominate that category compared to SGC, which makes sense because at this point, if you're grading something from the 2010s, it's probably something a little nicer, probably something a little higher value, and probably makes more sense to send to one of those two companies versus SGC. Because though SGC makes a lot of sense for the low to mid end, PSA, and depending on the card, BGS still makes sense for your upper tier cards. You want those in PSA or BGS slabs, in my opinion. And the secondary market typically backs that up. It's also not surprising down here at the bottom to see that Beckett and PSA for 70s and olders is less than 1%, and SGC actually registers on the scale for that. Just due to SGC's general popularity in the vintage market. They are very well respected in that market, so it's not surprising that they still get a lot of traffic in those older tiers. Let's flip over to a different slide here. Total graded items for January. PSAs remains unchanged. They did 777,000 last month, I believe, right around that number. So pretty much right there again, they knock it out of the park with almost 800,000 graded items. The surprising one to me, and this is what I was really interested in seeing when he said he was going to start bringing in the other grading company data, is how SGC and Beckett compare to each other. Because I think that's the war right now, is between SGC and Beckett as to who takes and just clear-cut second place. Because right now it's really between those two, at least for secondary market purposes. Sending in the grade, it makes way more sense to use SGC than Beckett for most stuff right now. But SGC coming in at 81,000, Beckett coming in at 61,000. So SGC actually graded more cards than Beckett did last month by a fair margin. Now you might say, but well, hey, Neo, they're not sending a lot of stuff to Beckett because, you know, yada, yada, yada. Their prices are high. The resale market's not that great, whatever. That may be the case, but here's the thing. Beckett still has a massive backlog. You go on the blowout forums and go look at some of the Beckett order tracking threads, and you will see people that still have some orders out there from 2020 that they have not gotten back yet from Beckett, and early 2021, much like PSA with some bulk orders. But there are still people with orders from 2020 that don't have their cards back from Beckett. So it's not like Beckett's hurting for work. Now, what I am really curious about isn't so much this month or next month or the month after. So what Gemrate is beginning to do, and I don't have it handy, otherwise I'd pull it up. He's beginning to chart this data weekly as, you know, number of cards graded each week for each company. So we could kind of see that charted. What I am interested in, and I guess myself and Cardporn both reached out to him to ask for something like this, so our wavelength is kind of on the same page. I am very interested in what does that look like as prices fluctuate between the grading companies. So what I mean by that is, say, all of a sudden SGC comes out and says $15 a card. You know, what is the lag time, and do we start to see a big increase in the number of cards that they are grading in a given week? Or same thing for PSA. Say they come out and say, hey, we're at $25 for economy orders. 6 months from now, we're wide open. No more backlog or very little backlog. Hit us with your best shot. And they start cranking again at full capacity. Do we see these numbers rise and fall? The other interesting thing is that we know right now PSA is basically working at what we can assume as peak. 800,000 cards a month. Just under that is about, that's what they could do right now. You have to assume they've done it 2 months in a row. By charting this data, you will also be able to see, does demand for a grading company lessen? Now, there'll be a little lag time in that because there's always going to be a little bit of a backlog, but there'll be some interesting trend data that you could see there is if all of a sudden, we get to the end of summer and 2 months in a row, 3 months in a row, PSA's at 800,000 cards a month, then they're at 700,000 cards a month, then they're at 600,000 cards a month or whatever, or vice versa. They're at 800, then they're at 900, then they're at, a million. Same with SGC, same with Beckett. Insert whatever company that you want, but I think it'll be very interesting to track as we move throughout the year and move over time, how those numbers fluctuate, how they vary, and what story does that potentially tell us about what's going on with those individual grading companies. Has demand for grading lessened, especially once these backlogs are cleared? Like right now, SGC really doesn't have a backlog. It's running at about 30 days business turnaround time for a regular order. That's perfectly acceptable. That's essentially very little to no backlog. If all of a sudden we start seeing them grade less cards month over month, does that mean the demand for their services is lessening? And once again, you can insert whatever grading company that you want. And then if all of a sudden, after a month or so of that, if we see an SGC price drop to try to bring more cards back into their vault or their grading company services. And once again, you could say the same thing with PSA or BGS. I'm not trying to single out SGC, but you kind of get what I'm going for here. I think this will be important data moving forward and kind of help us paint a picture of what's going on and potentially give us some leading indicators of what is going on at these grading companies as we get more history and understanding of how many cards they could grade in a single month. So Gemrate, if you're watching, absolutely fantastic work on this stuff. I think it's really going to pay off down the road. Last thing I want to look at here is the individual category breakdown that he does for number of cards graded per category, if you will. So not surprising, PSA dominated by basketball, 238,000 in basketball. What's surprising to me, and maybe this isn't surprising, this has kind of been this trend for a while, PSA is just dominating the TCG space. 213,000, almost as much as basketball, is TCG. Compare that to the other two companies. SGC, their first highest is baseball at 25,000 items. Their second highest is NBA at 20,000 items. That's interesting. Beckett, their highest is basketball at 24.6. Their second is baseball, but it is nearly half of that at just over 12,000 items. So SGC, it's baseball, then basketball. PSA, it's basketball, then nipping on the heels, TCG. Look at how far TCG is down on the list for SGC and Beckett. And then baseball and football are fairly close together with PSA. About the same for SGC, and Beckett is very close together as well. Soccer, pretty far down on the list for all of them. Really after that, for the other companies, it gets pretty small pretty quick. But the big outlier here is just how much PSA dominates the TCG category. I believe a large majority of that is Pokemon. A large majority of that is Pokemon cards. I'm sure there's some Magic and some other stuff mixed in there, but a large amount of that is Pikachu's. So once again, very, very interesting data here. And what this will be also curious to track over time as we move. Does one particular grading company kind of grab some market share with a particular slab? You know, does SGC suddenly become the go-to for a lot of Marvel cards? You're seeing a lot of Marvel stuff pop up in SGC slabs. Does the non-sport category grow with them month over month, especially as Marvel's heating up? That could be a potentially interesting number to track of how that non-sport number moves within each individual grading tier. But like I said, to me, the big takeaway here is that TCG is a dominant player for PSA. And then on the SGC side, I find it interesting that baseball is their number one most graded over basketball. I don't know if that says more about, maybe that's just a product of we have not had new NBA product yet. I'll be curious to see what that looks like in February and April, because we're going to start getting more and more NBA product with rookies in their current jerseys. And we are also going to get some pretty big football releases. We still don't have a lot of football releases. Word on the street is Prism football got moved to April now, as crazy as that sounds. So we might be getting Prism football of last year's rookie during this year's NFL draft, the way things are going. So curious for your thoughts and comments down below on this data. Is there anything interesting that kind of stuck out to you? Gemrate has not posted. He usually does a big blog post with a bigger deep dive on it. He has not done that yet. So I'll look forward to that. I probably won't do a video on it or anything. But if you're not following Gemrate on IG, you're doing it wrong. If you're not looking at his blog and using his data tools, you are also doing it wrong. He has some great data tools in regards to pop count tracking and all that stuff. So that's all I have for you guys and girls today. Like, comment, subscribe. I guess click the notification bell. I always forget to tell people that. I guess you're supposed to turn on notifications so you see when I do post a new video. So I guess do that YouTube thing too. But other than that, I will catch you guys and girls on the next one. Peace.